everybody. How are you guys doing out there? Happy New Year to everybody. Everybody that's coming in right now. Thank you guys for joining us. Today is First Fridays. This is the first Friday of 2022. 2022 is here, guys. And we hope that you had a awesome holiday season with your family. You had an opportunity to, hang out with them, get some rest, maybe set some goals for this new year, and really, truly just enjoy your family and your loved ones. So I hope that that was our prayer that each of you guys got to do that. As you all know, we have been since last year been hosting our First Friday program every first Friday of the each month at 3 p.m. Eastern. We host our First Friday conversation, which is centered on supplier diversity and how we can bring more equity. How as an industry, a cannabis industry, we can be more diverse. How we can be bring more equity to the conversation. How we can be inclusive of those people who are working within the industry. So definitely want to welcome you all. Hey, Deborah, I see you here joining us. Thank you guys for joining us. If you're here, please hit share and invite your family and friends to come in. I'm going to hit share on a couple as well. So you guys give me a second. But we have today, a conversation about measuring our efforts, our social equity and diversity and equity and inclusion efforts as a company. How do we measure those things, and how do we get those things to be, you know, working for our company? How do we tie those things into the goals that we set for our companies each year? Many times I know companies set goals as it pertains to ROI, as it pertains to productivity, a number of things that companies try to be strategic about and set goals on. And diversity, equity, and inclusion should be one of those things as well. And so we want to talk about that with you all today. Now, one of the things I will tell you is we have a guest for today, but unfortunately, being the new year and the kind of first week back at work for a lot of people, she had a last minute emergency come up and is right now unable to join us, but she may be joining us in just a little bit. So hopefully we'll get her in to join this conversation. But in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about, diversity, equity, and inclusion as it pertains to, for those of you who have cannabis businesses and you're in this space. And I'm of the belief, and of course, minorities for medical marijuana, we advocate for all companies in this space to have some type of social equity give back, to be very deliberate and intentional about hiring diverse candidates and promoting from within and finding ways to make sure that as they are brought into your company, you're being more inclusive of those individuals as well. A couple of things that happened, I think, about 2 years ago, we had the whole George Floyd situation, and Minorities for Medical Marijuana. We had a more than a moment. We partnered with MCBA, Minority Cannabis Business Association, to put on our More Than a Moment event, and we were calling, cannabis operators and cannabis companies, calling them in to participate in making sure that we didn't take moments like what happened with George Floyd and allow them to just be a moment. That it's a movement. It is a shift and a change in the way that we operate and the way that we do things. And we wanted to make sure that conversation began in the cannabis industry and that it continues to flourish in this industry and that it resonates with everybody. And so from that, our supplier diversity program, Impacure, was born. We oftentimes connect with cannabis operators who are looking for minority businesses to bring in, into their supply chain. And then we meet minority businesses and professionals who want to get in with cannabis companies, and there's a disconnect. And so we started Procure to be able to address that disconnect and be able to bridge that divide. And so we're very, very thankful to our program partners. Curaleaf, our Impacure program, is funded by them, and we do a variety of different efforts to make sure that we are creating the space and the infrastructure for the cannabis industry to be diverse and for companies in this space to consider equity and consider inclusion as a way of doing business and not as an afterthought. And so uh, our First Fridays, webinar that we do every month are meant to be conversations of how do you do that, kind of peeling back that onion and demystifying what DEI work looks like internally, taking some of the stigma away from it, and finding ways to again educate cannabis operators, educate minority businesses, what this looks like and how both can get involved. And so again, our conversation today is centered on this idea of how do we measure this, right? As a company, we don't want to be involved in activities that are not, something that we can measure and that is producing results that are again um, tied to our company, goals and our company values. And so, how do you do that as a company? And our guest today is someone who is a seasoned DEI professional, and so she was going to be here to share quite a bit about what happens internally, how companies do this, and so unfortunately we don't have her, but uh, on the fortunate side, I have worked with a number of companies here in the cannabis industry to write their diversity plans for their applications, as well as those companies who are already operational, who are looking at how they implement a DEI strategy for their company. And they're one of the things that I always try to do when I work with companies is start from the very beginning. What do you value as a company? And do you as a company have any type of value statement as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion? If not, that's a low hanging fruit that you can go and do as a company and consider what are your current values as a company and what might be your values and what might you value as a company as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I start there because when we're looking at this work in not just the cannabis industry, but all industries, because again, DEI is not new to cannabis. It's something that as this industry matures, we have to get better at as an industry. Companies in this space have to be intentional about that. But it's not new to business. It's a part of how business has run in many other industries. And but what we have to understand is that it's not just one-off activities. It's not just one-off events. You know, DEI work isn't just putting out a press release after someone has been some tragedy has taken place in the social world, if you will. It's not just saying that okay, we're going to hire minorities. It goes deeper than that. It's not just hiring a single African American to your team and then expecting them to be the voice of all minorities. That's not what DEI work is. And when I work with companies, we have to begin the conversation from um, what is the infrastructure that is needed for DEI work to be successful in a company? And it begins with the values. If you as a company uh, don't have a value for this work, then one, you aren't going to uh, you know integrate it into the fabric of your company. You aren't going to see the necessity to put budget towards it. You aren't going to be have the insight and the foresight to think about how you can measure these, and you aren't going to be able to communicate to your leadership, to your owners, to uh, your board, how the work that you're doing plays into the value of the company. And so if you don't have an infrastructure for doing that, then you won't be able to do some of those things. And so again, going back to uh, starting with what do you as a company value in particular as it pertains to DEI work, and then from there you could begin to identify your overall uh, approach to DEI work. How are you going to approach this topic? How are you going to is it going to be from the top down leadership, or is it going to be uh, lower level involvement informing the higher level leadership? How are you going to approach this? And then from developing your approach, you can then determine what uh, strategies and what tactics you will implement, what activities you will do as it relates to DEI work. Um, and then you can measure that. But, when we start with the framework, again, you see it gets tied back into everything. And when we talk about the measuring of it, now we have different metrics that we can measure it by. Does this work align with our values? Well, if you have a DEI value statement, now you can directly tie the activities that you're doing within your business, whether it be sponsoring a particular nonprofit, whether it be holding a particular education event, or whatever your tactics and activities you get into, you can tie them back to the value of the company, and that becomes in and of itself a measure. You can begin to set goals or benchmarks for different departments as it pertains to DEI, because then it is related back to that structure. A lot of what informs my knowledge about this space goes back to what I oftentimes refer to as a previous life. Before I got into the cannabis industry, I worked in higher education, and we were required as a department every year to set goals as it pertains to diversity. And so we would meet multiple times throughout the year, and we were on a larger cycle. And so in one year, we would set our goals, and those goals had to be aligned directly to the values of the university. So the university had a set of values, and under those values, or every goal that we set as a department had to relate back to one of those values that the company had. Again, if it didn't relate back to that value, then that wasn't something or that we as a department could participate in, or that we could even put down. And then once we, determined what the values were, or what our goals were and how they related to the values, then we determined, okay, well, what are our objectives out of this? What do we anticipate getting out of it as a department, and how are we going to measure this? And not just how we're going to measure it, but what is our target goal within it? So, for instance, if the idea was that you were going to increase your if the goal was having a diverse workforce at the company. I'm sorry, the value was that you value a diverse workforce. The goal at that department level was that we were going to increase our uh, staff numbers, higher up, by a certain percentage. And so we had to set that percentage as a departmental level. And then once we set that percentage, we had to determine how we were going to measure whether or not we hit that. And so again, you have the goals that relate back to the values, and then you have those percentages that we set for ourselves. And then the second phase of that cycle was actually implementing, the activities that we said we would do in order to hit our target goals. And then the third part of that cycle was evaluating what we did and resetting goals and going back through that process. So I see a couple people tapping in. What's going on, Lawrence, out there in California? Good to see you as well. I thought we saw some questions. But yeah, if anybody is on as well, please feel free to drop, any questions about, DEI work as it pertains to the cannabis industry. I love for those of you who are watching, if you are a part of a company, what are some of the things that your companies are doing for DEI? What are the value statements that you guys have? What are the goals you guys set for yourself, and how are you measuring those? So definitely want you all to uh, join this conversation with me. I'm still looking to see if our guest may be able to show up for us today. Again, if you're just joining the conversation, my name is Eric Range. I'm the board chair of Minorities for Medical Marijuana. This is our first Friday's conversation, which is all about um, supplier diversity and diversity, equity, and inclusion in the cannabis industry. And how do we do that within the cannabis companies? You know, there are many people who are already licensed, many people who have ancillary businesses in the space who have been operating for a number of years, and they want to do better. They want to figure out how do you tap into more diverse applicant pools. They want to figure out how do we, connect. How you doing, Yvette? How do we treat people well in this industry? How do we not? How do we avoid some of the pitfalls that other industries have had as it pertains to being diverse? And I've oftentimes been quoted as saying that I think we have a real opportunity in the cannabis industry to create the most diverse industry across the country. Many other industries that have been well established have uh, standard practices in place, have ways of thinking that are in place that get in the way of doing some of the things that we should do. Whereas in the cannabis industry, we were born from a uh, a a travesty to our communities. So, everybody who's in cannabis recognizes that there were people who were locked up because of this plant. There were communities that were destroyed because of this plant, and that as an industry, we have an obligation to do something about that. We have an obligation to, give back to help restore the harm that was done by the war on drugs. And so this conversation fits squarely into that. We'll be having it every first Friday. We'll have different guest speakers on to educate you guys about diversity, equity, inclusion as it pertains to the cannabis industry. Excuse me. And continue informing you all how to implement that in your businesses and how to connect with diverse business owners for your supply chain, and just again making sure that we are creating the most diverse industry as we can. Um, I don't know if Deborah is still here. If Deborah, if you're here, I'm just curious. What are some of the topics you guys are hearing as it pertains to DEI out there? What are you guys doing? Lawrence, if you're a part of a company, Jaguar, Yvette, all of you guys weigh in. What are some of the things that you've seen inside your own companies that it is effective, or maybe not effective, or maybe some things you wish that you would see that companies would do. I have been speaking a little bit about the internal framework that I think needs to be in place for this work to be meaningful, for it to be impactful, and to give you the opportunity to measure it so that you can then communicate that to your owners, your leadership, to your shareholders, your board, about why it's important that you continue doing that work, why it's important that you slate budget for it, and give those individuals that you bring into your company the tools that they need to be effective. Which brings me to another point. We have seen a lot of companies in the cannabis space begin to hire DEI professionals, which I think is amazing and I think is necessary work. But one of the things that we haven't seen yet is for those same companies to give these individuals the tools that they need to be effective, to take the handcuffs off, if you will, and allow them to do what they were hired to do. I have had numerous conversations with individuals who've been placed in these roles, with some of the cannabis multi-state operators that you guys are familiar with, and they're limited in what they're able to do, either because the company hasn't figured out quite what it wants to do as it pertains to social equity, as it pertains to DEI, or the company hasn't seen the value in placing this as a real priority, i.e., making it an integral part of decision making, putting budget towards it, giving dedicating team and staff time towards you know, being trained and retooling for this. Okay, we got something from Deborah. What we got? As someone from the investment world, having DEI and investors, so having DEI and investors so they can relate and understand what an entrepreneur is proposing is critical. That is how we can increase funding diversity. That, you know, that is such a critical part. You're right. We have to get more funding to you know, to smaller companies and understanding, you know, where how we approach this, you know, as an entrepreneur, as a small business, I think is definitely important. Again, this is why we have these conversations, to try to have these conversations to unearth, you know, where's that disconnect between the conversations that are happening in the boardroom versus the conversations that are happening, you know, again, on a small entrepreneur team trying to go after a license. You know, what does that look like? You know, and how do we connect that divide? Um, you know, that's a very interesting you know, a point. Investors, yeah, we hope you guys are tuning in and listening and learning. We hope that something that we're saying to you all is resonating. Um, and you know, you should, you know, I would say to investors, uh, you absolutely should make it a point that a percentage of your portfolio be dedicated to supporting, you know, small minority startups in this space, and you know, beyond the fund. And I think that's so critical that we talk about funding, but I think something that is often overlooked is the support. And again, Deborah, I know you guys are doing some amazing work around this as well with women. But the support that entrepreneurs and even sometimes seasoned business professionals who are, you know, starting businesses, that they need in order to navigate through this industry is critical. You know, it's not only that you have to, you know, understand sound business practices in this space, you know, for any business to be successful, you have to be able to navigate a, you know, the most regulated industry that exists right now, and that's not an easy thing to do, and so that requires mentorship, that requires support, which is, you know, another thing that I've recommended to some of the companies I worked for in the past. Perhaps your give back isn't monetary at all from the standpoint of cutting a check, but perhaps it's a give back of time. So if you have a marketing department, allowing a percentage of their time to be dedicated to supporting social equity applicants, or supporting, you know, minority businesses and minority professionals, folks who are in your supply chain. Sometimes, you know, you want to bring a minority business into your supply chain, but perhaps they're not quite at the stage that they need to be. Well, that's a perfect opportunity versus shutting the door and saying, come back when you're ready, and saying, you know, hey, as a part of our DEI strategy, we're willing to help you get to that next stage. So that means that perhaps our accounting department can help you with your books, or, you know, maybe we need you to be certified, you know, MBE or WBE or disadvantaged business enterprise, minority, for all the acronyms I just gave, minority business enterprise, women business, and disadvantaged business, or veterans as well. Perhaps working with companies to go through that process instead of just sending them away and saying, hey, come back when you're ready. That may be the very thing that sets them over the top. So, you know, allowing some of your staff to dedicate time to supporting them in that way can go, you know, miles. You know, giving your legal staff, you know, for cannabis operators, you're going to lobby. You know, perhaps allowing your lobby team to support a local nonprofit's, you know, efforts that are there. These things can go a long way, and they are not always a monetary, you know, again, contribution in the terms of cutting a check. Sure, you got to pay your staff still, so it does come with some type of investment, but it's something that you can do, you know, that's fairly creative. That, you know, I think many. It's another way of even ingraining this into the fabric of the company, because now you're as a decision maker. not just saying we're going to cut a check and we are going to support this as a company, but we're going to make sure that our employees and our staff have buy-in in what we're doing as well. Those are different ways to do that. And how do you measure something like that? You can measure it in time. In terms of what is the actual investment you're making. Well, each employee, if you're dedicating, allowing them to dedicate, you know, maybe 5 hours a week, you can quantify that in terms of an actual investment, and then you can then measure it by the number of companies that you're able to successfully get through a particular process, or the number of you can measure it one by the success of getting, say for instance you took the opportunity to have a company to help a company go through getting their women-owned business enterprise certification. So you can measure that by how many company and women are you able to successfully help through that process, and then when you bring them on to your into your supply chain, now you're also increasing the number of minorities within your supply chain, and you can measure that quantifiably, and then you can measure the number of dollars that you're spending with those particular minority suppliers. And so this is how you begin to measure it, and you set goals for it, and then you begin to progress and you see what works and what doesn't work. And so these are some of the things again that I've helped companies with in the past. We have other professionals within M4MM who've done this work as consultants, but we hope that we can shed more light on these conversations in the cannabis industry, so that we can be as diverse as possible. Thanks, Deborah, for weighing in on that. Anybody else have anything they want to add to the conversation, a question, a comment, or anything? I'm going to assume at this time that we're not going to have our speaker, and so I'm going to go ahead and cut today's episode short if we don't have any other, comments or thoughts or questions. But again, thanks to anybody who has joined. This has been M4MM's First Friday conversation for our M4Cure National Program, which is all about supplier diversity and creating diversity, equity, and inclusion in the cannabis industry. My name is Eric Range. We welcome you all to become members of M4MM. Visit our website, m4mmunited.org. Get involved with your local chapter. We have chapters in several states around the country, and we are committed to doing the work. And if you are someone who wants to get involved with that, definitely reach out to us and connect with us. So thank you, everybody who has joined and listening to this conversation. I hope you were able to take something from it, and hopefully you take this conversation into some of the circles that you exist in, into your network, into the boardroom with you, or with some of your partners, and begin talking about ways that you can implement your DEI strategy, how you can measure that, and add to and contribute to the cannabis industry being the most diverse industry in the United States. All right, thanks everybody. We'll catch y'all next month. Take it easy.